Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at how React Suspense would work. So, we have seen that how you can import it, but kind of not use it yet. So what I'm going to do in this one is I'm going to use something known as react.suspense. Now this is another, you can say it's obviously it's a element, but the way this works is that it's going to see which element right here is dynamic, right? And it also needs a single parameter. So we're going to add that. But what it's going to do is that once you specify, let's say a fallback of div loading, right? Something like this. If you refresh, what's going to happen is that for a split second, if you can just see, let me just go ahead and throttle some gears here inside network. Let's see, online slow 3G. And in fact, let me just go ahead and do a little bit of change here. So I'm going to say show component and then show component. And we can probably create this other state variable. Set show component, because that way we are a little bit more predictable, right? So we start with initially as false. And whenever I click on this, we would just toggle the state, right? So I can say show component like this. And of course, we can bring in the use state like this, and there we go. So pay very close attention to how things look like in the dev tools. So you see, initially we have 10 requests and no heavy loaded component available with us. So I'm going to clear all these requests so that we have a clean slate. Now, when I click on this, you can see that we get loading message first of all, and then we also see a one.chunk.js file being loaded. And if you go to the preview of this, well, this looks ugly because this is in the development build. On production, this will look much uglier. So that's not an excuse, but you should be able to find heavy component somewhere here. You see, you can find this. So what just happened? The thing that just happened was that because you are lazily importing this component got its own another JS file which had to be loaded individually. So let's see how this would look like if you did not have a lazy loading. So I'm going to import it manually, refresh this, and you can see that once we do that, you're going to see if I click on this, we immediately see the heavy component. There is no loading, there's nothing. Why? Because the loading, this heavy component is already included in the 0.chunk.js file. So you can go ahead and search for heavy component, or at least if not in this one, component. If not in this file, then in some other file, maybe bundle. Let's see. Nope. Main. There we go. So you can see that it was already loaded, even though it was not visible and even though it was not required, right? The user might never really click on the hello world big title anyway. So this component might not be required anyway, but you still loaded it. That's a waste of bandwidth and space. So instead of that, if you do something like this, this will work in a much better way. Now, obviously you don't really want to lazy load every single thing because if that thing is immediately required on the screen, why would you want to make 2 HTTP requests, right? That will be just a waste of timing when you can just bring the data in a single one. So use lazy components only when you know that the data is either delayed by user action or maybe, some sort of event which will happen later down the line by timers or something like that. So that's how you're going to use React.Suspense, and feel free to put any sort of element here, right? So you can have this component is loading at the moment, right? Hit save. And now when I click on this, well, we did not refresh the page, but what's going to happen is now when you click on that, you're going to see this component is loading at the moment, and then you see heavy component file loaded, and then it will be available. Right? So my one big advice is that just put this as many places as you can and want to, where you see that the component would be visible after some sort of user interaction. That could be like your golden rule of using React.lazy with React.suspense. Now, one more thing with React.Suspense, which you should know about, is that this component, whatever component it is, while it's loading, it will fall back to the closest React.Suspense. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say you have another React.Suspense here, which says fallback p parent loading, right? And this will encapsulate the whole thing. So what do you think would happen when you refresh it and when you just go ahead and load it, click on it for the first time? Well, you see that we still get this component is loading. Why? Because this component right here, whenever this starts loaded, it's gonna climb up the hierarchy and see that, this one is closer to me, therefore I'm gonna make use of this fallback, right? Now, when this fallback is occurring, what you're gonna observe is that every single thing inside the React.Suspense gets replaced, right? So what do I mean by that? Is that, let's say we have this is something, hit save and refresh. Now what you're gonna see is that you always will have this is something available, but the moment you click on this, you see this component is loading is what we get. And then again, we get this is something, but with heavy component. So this is important to understand. Let's say if you try to move this outside, which will then make use of this one right here, what's gonna happen is that the next time this is loading, if I refresh this, the next time it is loading, it's gonna fall back to this, and the main parent Suspense is gonna just remove every single thing and replace it with parent loading. So if I click on this, you can see we lose everything on the screen and then we get parent loading. So this is why one little advice, or maybe, depends on your use case, is that if you try to keep the Suspense as close as possible to the component which is loading, that way you would not destroy the other UI on the page while the page is loading, right? So if you have a common Suspense across the whole application, then sure, it will work just fine. But whenever there's a dynamic component loading, your whole app will go into a loading state, which is probably not what you want, depending on how you want your site to be architected. But anyway, this is something I believe you should know. And yeah, you should play around with React Suspense. It's pretty cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm gonna see you in the next one really soon.